Hello and welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm your host, Jay Smith, executive editor of Model Aviation and Park Pilot magazines. Got a really exciting show for you today, and I want to jump in right away with our guests. But I do have to mention, many of you know, if you've seen the show before, that I'm a big Doctor Who fan. So I wanted to share, if you don't know, that next week is the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who. November 23rd is the actual anniversary. And if you haven't watched the show before, or you did in the past, the exciting news is it's on Disney Plus. So this is an advertisement. I'm just sharing as a fan of the show that uh, the anniversary is the 23rd, and on the 25th will be the 60th anniversary episode. So as you know, I usually have a lot of things on my desk from Doctor Who, like this K9. He was radio controlled in the show, in the actual show in the late 70s. This full-size robot dog was radio controlled. And so I'm looking forward to the special. And there's also a Doctor Who convention next weekend in Chicago, which I went to 30 years ago. But anyway, enough about that. But it is an interesting segue. So we're not going to bring him out quite yet, but our guest today is Sal Calvagna, and he is our giant scale columnist. And he's also, I'll share a little insight, he's a huge Ray Harryhausen fan. And Ray Harryhausen made monster movies. And Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor of Doctor Who, played in the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And because of that role, he got the role as the Doctor. And he was the most famous Doctor of what they call the classic series. So anyway, enough about that, but it's an interesting segue for our guests. So what I'd like to do first is we're going to talk about a really special donation that Sal made to the Dayton Air Force Museum. And I was lucky enough to be there and be part of it. So the Dayton Air Force Museum has released a video of the airplane that Sal built, flew, and donated. So we're going to watch that. It's about 7 minutes long, and then we're going to talk to Sal about this. So enjoy. My apologies that we didn't have sound with that. The video we showed is on YouTube. It was posted by the National Air Force Museum in Dayton. So, but fortunately, Sal is on the show. So I'd like to welcome Sal so we can talk about this great airplane that he built and donated. Hi,
Hey,
Sal.
hey, how's everybody doing?
Welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, we have to start off, Sal, with where did you get the idea to build a 16-foot wingspan Sikorsky airplane?
Well, if you ever bought one of those aircraft books, the large ones, that had all World War I, World War II airplanes in it, and scroll through it, and you can see a bunch of different airplanes. I was always struck by an early Sikorsky design, the Ilya Muromets, which I built. And I look at the photo, and as a modeler, I try to understand how you could build something like this and fly it. If you look at it in the video, you'd see there's really nothing north of the leading edge of the wing. So the question I get from everyone is, how do you balance it? How do you balance it in an airplane? I imagine that's one of the reasons why modelers haven't tackled this airplane. A couple of other reasons would be, well, the 32 struts you have to make, and all those landing and flying wires. It's like a UHF antenna. There's so many wires on that model. But later on in my modeling life, I decided, why not? Why not try to tackle this? So I have one of those Ford Econoline 15-passenger extended vans. And when I took some measurements, I said, what's the largest model of a Sikorsky design that I could build and get into the van? And sure enough, it was 1/6 scale. So that's how I came about trying to build a large Sikorsky Ilya Muromets.
And as we saw in the video, it barely fits in the van. I mean, you maximized your space.
Yes, it's a little tedious getting it in and getting it out. Nevertheless, it does fit, and I designed it to break down into just 3 sections, and that's the fuselage with the tail, the empennage, and the two wing panels. The wing panels are almost 8 feet each, and of course the fuselage is 9.5 feet, maybe a little longer than that. But the key was being able to install the 2 outer panels to the fuselage and secure it in such a way that it wouldn't fold in flight, and it was strong enough to support the fuselage was strong enough to support the wings. As you can see, the wings, they stay, the bottom and top wings stay together. They're all wired together, with the exception of the innermost landing and flying wires. And that's the only thing that you need to put together when you want to put the wings on and fly it. The landing wires and the flying wires, both between the wings and by the landing gear.
Ken at the museum did a beautiful job with the video, and the video he did of you flying it at the Doppler Rendezvous. And as it turns out, Ken is a member of AMA and is very involved in aero modeling. So really appreciate it. Must have been really exciting to see the video get released on YouTube, Sal.
Oh, I'm super excited about this whole thing. It came about approximately 1 year ago. My wife and I went to the World War One rendezvous that the National Air Force Museum hosts every other year. So I brought the airplane. That weekend it was cold, it was windy. They have full size World War One aircraft flying and models flying. We each had separate slots to fly. But the Thursday and Friday, there was no way I could fly that airplane. But on Saturday, it was very calm in the morning, and I grabbed the tail, ran it out to the field, and that's when I grabbed the flight. During the weekend, hundreds of people from the community were by asking questions about our models. And they go up and down the line looking at the models, and we would talk to these people. Well, unbeknownst to me, one of them was the director of the museum. And he came back on Saturday and introduced himself to me as the director. And it was then that he asked if I would be willing to donate it to the museum. So after thinking about it for maybe 5 seconds, I said sure, I would be honored. And he immediately got on his cell phone and called the director of collections, who came over and went through the whole process with me. So she said, when you're done flying it, when you're done using it, let us know and we'll make arrangements for you to come deliver it. And that's about a year later, that's what I did.
And I'm very thankful to have taken part in that. It was a really special day. And I want to show a photo to go back even before you flew it at the Doppler Rendezvous. You unveiled the airplane at AMA Expo East. But not only that, but the person sitting next to you is one of the sons of his name is Nikolai. He's one of the Sikorsky sons. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it goes back even further. When I wanted to build this airplane, I needed some documentation, and I got some 3 views out of Russia. I have some here. I'll show you. These are some of the 3 views that I was able to obtain online with dimensions. Here's some more. These are well, let me see what best way to. I got it upside down. Here's some excellent 3 views. Here's some others that came right out of Russia with dimensions on them. So I gathered some information, and I even contacted the Sikorsky Corporation in Connecticut, and they put me through to their archives. And I spoke to the director of their archives, or supervisor there, and what he told me was that they didn't have a lot of information about his early years in Russia because Igor kind of left in a hurry. Actually, he probably left with the clothes on his back and a jewel-encrusted gold watch that was presented to him by Tsar Nicholas, the last Tsar of Russia, for his for achievements in aviation. Many people don't know this, but Igor Sikorsky is the father of 4-engine aircrafts. He's the first one to design and build a 4-engine aircraft. So I gathered as much information as I could. And the Sikorsky people said, it sounds like an interesting project. Keep in touch. Send us some photos from time to time, which I did. So as I built the airplane, I would send them some photos. And when I was done with it, approximately 16 months later, I sent them photos of the finished model, upon where I received a phone call from the corporation inviting me over there. Now, I live on Long Island, so it was a matter of just taking a short ferry ride from Long Island to Connecticut and a 10-minute drive. And what they told me was, unbeknownst to me, they've been showing the photos to Igor's sons. And there were three sons that were still alive: Sergei, Nikolai, and Igor Jr. So when I brought the airplane over, I assembled it, and I got to meet the Sikorsky family and Dan Schultz, who at the time was the CEO of Lockheed Sikorsky. And I had a great meeting with the Sikorsky family. They asked me many questions about building the airplane. And Nikolai said that, you can never fly this airplane. We don't want to see it damaged. It's a beautiful work of art, and it has to go somewhere to be appreciated. And my response to him was, Nikolai, at this point, it's only a model. But once it flies, it becomes an aircraft. Which then he told me that if I ever went to fly it, he was going to hit me with a stick. He never did hit me with a stick, but I did fly it, and I flew it for the very first time at the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome in Rhinebeck, New York, upstate New York. And every year they have what they call the Rhinebeck Jamboree. And it's a weekend of World War I and early models flying, along with the full-size show that they put on during the weekend. And at the end of the day, since the airplane has never been flown, after the official closing of the modeling meet, after 5 o'clock, I put it on the field. And what I wanted to do was just get it off the ground to try to feel the airplane to see if it was stable. Just enough to get a feel for the elevator, aileron, maybe a foot off the ground. And as I taxied out to the runway and turned around and gave it some throttle, it started rolling down the runway faster and faster, and then it jumped into the air and went up about 50 feet and scared the hell out of me. So I immediately pulled back on the throttle, and I probably landed about 1,000 feet away. It just had a beautiful glide path, and I landed and I taxied it all the way back, and I knew at that point that the airplane was stable. So I brought it back to our home field on Long Island, where I took some flights with it, and it's an extremely stable, easy to fly airplane. In fact, it's boring. It takes quite a time to make one circuit around, but just to watch this mammoth model fly with nothing north of the leading edge is a sight to see. So from there, I took it around the country, to the Ram show, to the Toledo show, down to the Smithsonian. I was invited to the Smithsonian. I took it to the Virginia Military Aviation Museum right outside of Virginia Beach, where I flew it at the museum. And again, everyone marvels at how stable this airplane is, with nothing north of the leading edge. So it's been a wonderful experience.
Well, so I saw it for the first time at AMA Expo East, formerly known as the Ram Show, and got to meet Nikolai. I actually took this photo that we're looking at, and I got to meet Nikolai, and he was so interesting. And he was a musician. He worked with his father when he was younger, but then he followed his career path. He was a musician, but he was just a wealth of information and interesting. And so unfortunately he's no longer with us, but something really meaningful happened to me in the last year or so. So if we'll show another picture. So this is a book So Eddie Rickenbacker, obviously the top U.S. World War I ace, he wrote at least 2 books, maybe more, and this is one of them. This one is Seven Came Through, and it's about he was on a war bond tour, and his plane went down in the ocean, and they were out at sea for days before they were rescued. And this tells that story. And when he published this book, he was friends with the Sikorsky family, and this particular book he signed to Nikolai, and he wrote, I don't know how you can see it there, but he wrote, "To my young friend Nikolai Sikorsky," and he signed it and dated it 1966. Nikolai owned this book in his collection for his entire life, from the day he was given it until after he passed. And for whatever reason, whoever, his family or whomever, chose to sell his books. And I found this book at a collectible book dealer and purchased it because, firstly, I'm a big fan and have a lot of interest in Eddie Rickenbacker, World War One. He also, if you don't know, owned the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was a race car driver prior to World War One. So I was interested in having the book and having his autograph, having Eddie Rickenbacker's autograph, but also the fact that it was given as a gift to Nikolai, and I got to meet Nikolai at Expo, made it all the more special. So that book is right here in my office on my bookshelf. So I just thought it'd be interesting to share that story. Do you have any other thoughts about Nikolai, Sal?
Well, that was a great AMA Expo, because not only do we get to meet Nikolai, but we got to meet the astronaut Hoot Gibson, and Hoot Gibson and Nikolai knew each other. They were friends. So that was a great experience. It really was. And Nikolai was a fantastic guy. You know, he was a gentleman. It was great to be able to befriend him and befriend the Sikorsky family. And you didn't hear it in the video, but Igor Sikorsky, he really had 3 separate careers in aviation. It started in Imperial Russia. He got interested in aviation early on as a young man, and what he was interested in was vertical takeoff and landing. He wanted to design a helicopter. His sister loaned him the money or gave him the money to buy an engine, a 3-cylinder engine. Maybe it was an Anzani, I'm not sure. And he actually built 2 vertical lift contraptions with counter-rotating rotors above. Neither of them were successful, but that's where he started his life in aviation. Now, he went on from there to design fixed-wing aircraft. And it was during one of his flights, because he taught himself how to fly, in one of his fixed-wing aircraft, that he had an engine out condition after takeoff, where the airplane came back down. It was damaged. He wasn't hurt bad, but he found out that I don't know if it was a mosquito or something landed in the carburetor orifice and blocked the airflow or fuel flow. I'm not sure what it was, but at that point he got into his head that it's better to have multi-engines on an aircraft instead of single engine. And that's when he went to a friend of his and said, "Listen, I want to start designing multi-engine aircraft." And that's where he started. And it was in 1913 he built the first multi-engine aircraft. And I have a photo here. It's in this book. As soon as I find the book, and and it was the first multi-engine aircraft he designed. It was called the Grand, and I don't know if you can see it, but this is his first multi-engine aircraft. It was called the Grand, and it had had like a cupola out front that you could stand on, and it had a little internal cockpit, a large internal cockpit. And from there, he went from 2 engines to 4 engines configuration. And that's when he started designing the later version, the Ilya Muromets. Now, the Ilya Muromets is the name Ilya Muromets is actually a Russian folk hero, kind of sort of like Paul Bunyan. He's a folk hero, and he decided to name the aircraft after that. Now, here's a great photo. Let's see. There we go. That's the Grand, and on top, in the cupola, in that little area in the front, is Igor Sikorsky talking with Tsar Nicholas. Tsar Nicholas came to visit the aircraft, and Igor even offered him a ride, which he respectfully declined. But from then, he designed these 4-engine aircraft that were used as reconnaissance bombers during the war. Now, before the war, just before the war, he piloted one of his 4-engine aircraft 1,400 nautical miles from St. Petersburg to Kiev and back. And inside were 16 passengers in a comfortable salon with wicker furniture. It had heat from a nearby engine. It had electricity and lights from a wind-borne generator. And it also had probably the first airborne toilet. Now, I have a photo of what the interior of this aircraft looked like. I have it off to the side here. Let's see. Where did I put it? Just give me a second here.
No problem. Take your time.
I'm a little discombobulated. Well, here's a great photo anyway. Let me show you this. This is Igor Sikorsky in 1914. That's a photo of him as a young man. But I have a photo of, maybe it's in this book here.
While you're looking, Sal, I want to share a couple of comments. So John Greco Sr. said, "Beautiful workmanship, Sal." And then HobbyView, you'll be very interested in this, Sal. HobbyView says, "Wow, as a Connecticut native whose father did work for Sikorsky, this really has given me all the feels."
Wow. Well, here's both those photos. This is one of his early attempts at building a helicopter. There's Igor Sikorsky with the counter-rotating blades with this little 3-cylinder engine, and it wasn't powerful enough to lift. But that's him, probably in 1908. But I have a great shot. Oh, here we go. Again, I'm going to make it so people can see. Here we go. There's the interior with the wicker furniture. And again, he took 16 passengers and a dog, by the way, on that 1,400 nautical mile flight with this 4-engine aircraft. And this was record breaking. This was record breaking all around the world. And very few people know that because because it came out of Russia. That's why. But here's another great photo of one of his Sikorsky Ilya Muromets, and it's really interesting because it's famous. There's two gentlemen riding along the top of the airplane as it's flying.
Yeah,
Now,
that's really interesting.
yeah, this airplane only flew at around 70 miles an hour, but it was a record-breaking aircraft for its time. Now, originally they used engines from Germany, Argus 6-cylinder inline engines, which were extremely reliable in 1913, 1914. But the war came in the middle of 1914, and Russia was at war with Germany. They weren't getting any more Argus engines out of Germany. So now they're building these aircraft for the Imperial Air Force, Air Service, and they needed engines. And they tried a myriad of different types of engines, rotary engines on there. But what they settled on was that England was willing to sell them 50 V8 engines made by Sunbeam Corporation. You know, Sunbeam later on became famous for, I guess, cars and racing cars. But early on, they built the aircraft engines, and they built these V8 Crusaders of about 150 horsepower each. And that's the model that I decided to build, the one that had the V8 engine. So here's some photos of these real V8 engines that I had to replicate, and these were designed by a gentleman named Cotelin. He's a Frenchman, and those black things, one behind the other, are actually magnetos. But these were L-head engines. They were about 150 horsepower each. The Russians really didn't care for them. They didn't care for them because they were hard to maintain and a little bit on the difficult side. But there it is. What's interesting about these engines is the intakes are on the outside of the head. That's a carburetor below. Those are the intakes. The exhausts are on the top of the head. So that was pretty interesting. And here's an advertisement from Sunbeam Cotelin aircraft motors. And they were able to install these on these Ilya Muromets. And that's the version I built. They were pretty interesting. How do you build, 4 V8 engines? Well, first of all, in order to keep with scale fidelity, I knew that I couldn't put glow engines or gas engines on this airplane. If I was going to make it look right, make it look the part, it had to be electric. So what I did was I took the size of the V8. Here's a rudimentary drawing that I made showing the heads, and that circle represents the crankcase where I would install Axie 4130 outrunner motors, electric outrunner motors, and that's what I actually did. So I had to make the parts for the engine, and what I did was 4 engines need 8 heads. 8 heads were all the same. So I made a rubber mold. It wasn't difficult to make. I made 1 part each. Here's the original head I made. This head is made up of balsa, a little aircraft grade ply, some very small nuts and bolts, miniature. The look, the little spark plugs I made. There's actually, these are cooling ports, and I made one head. I painted it and sprayed it with mold release, and then I made a mold. And this mold, I would pour resin in, so I could make repeatable, accurate parts, resin parts, by making just one part of the engine. Now, again, this is just the head. Here's the front of the crankcase. It's one part. This is the mold that I made, so I can make 4 of them, and so on and so forth. So I only had to make one part each, and then make repeatable resin parts, and of course glue them all together. So when I was done, I had these great V8 engines. They looked apart, and actually, you saw them on the video, that the electric motors were hidden inside the crankcase and behind the radiators. So I was able to swing a scale size prop, and I was able to hide a 6S LiPo battery under the engines between the motor mounts, so you didn't see anything from the front, and it just worked out just fine. I couldn't be happier. Even the landing gear. Here's a drawing of the landing gear. It's a floating axle, and it's held on by 4 rows of bungee cords. That's what the real one had. And here's a photo of the real one. Floating axle, 4 rows of bungee cord, and that's where you get your shock absorbing quality from. And that's exactly what I did on the model. The gear operates the same way. So the big question was, how do you balance this model? Where is the center of gravity? And I only have one document. This comes from Russia. This document discusses the Ilium Muromets. It's in Russian. Don't ask me to read it. But in the shaded part, where it looks like a UT, that is the center of gravity. It's towards the trailing edge of the wing, not towards the leading edge, towards the trailing edge. And I balanced the airplane just like that, towards the trailing edge. You have to understand that this aircraft had a huge lifting stab, an enormous lifting stab, which helped. And again, the airplane it's just a 4-channel airplane, and it was extremely stable. So I imagine that the full size was very stable too. It flies like the full size. I have information that in these books. Here's a great book about the Sikorsky legacy that said that the airplane flew level flight, tail high, about 3 degrees. And if you look at the video, the model flies in a level flight about 3 degrees tail high. It's again, it was a very easy airplane to fly. Not so easy to build. The tail alone, just the tail feathers, had 82 small brass turnbuckles that all had to be safety wired. And I have these man mitts, the Fred Flintstone hands. So I had quite a time safety wiring these tiny brass turnbuckles that I purchased. Anyway, there it is. Now, after I went to visit the Sikorskys, they presented me. Here's a book that their father had written, and it starts off with a nice note that Nikolai Sikorsky wrote to me. Was in May of 2016. He passed on, I believe, 2 years later. Um, and it's all in Russian, but it goes into his later career, which was helicopters. He designed the first successful commercial helicopter during well, it would be the early 40s, because his helicopter was used during World War II. The Army purchased them, the Army Air Corps, and they were used to fly out wounded soldiers, especially out of areas like Burma, where it was inaccessible to airfields. So yeah, he had three separate careers in aviation. Now I skipped over the second part of the second career. When Igor left Russia, he left under a threat of death by the Bolsheviks or the communists, and he emigrated first. He went to France and then to New York, where he ended up in Manhattan, and he taught Russian language, he taught mathematics, he taught astronomy to make ends meet. But the Russian expatriate community, they recognized him as being the great aircraft designer he was. So they cobbled up some money, and he started building a biplane out on Long Island in Hempstead. From the little money that he got, they cobbled together parts from the junkyard. They got enough money to buy a couple of engines. It was a twin engine biplane. And during the construction, which was, by the way, outdoors at his friend's chicken farm in Hempstead Plains, one day a black limousine pulled up, and out came Rachmaninoff, who was a famous Russian composer. And Igor gave him a tour of the biplane, and how much they got done and what they needed to finish. And Rachmaninoff took out a checkbook and wrote Igor a check for $5,000. And that started the Sikorsky Aircraft Corporation. They rented a hangar, I believe, at Roosevelt Field on Long Island. They put up a big sign, and they took the airplane and towed it with the help of the local police force all the way to Roosevelt Field, where they finished building it. Now, that airplane that he built was eventually sold to Howard Hughes. First, it went to a cigar company. They traveled around the country advertising their cigars. And then Howard Hughes bought it. He converted it to a sort of looking like a Gotha bomber. And Howard Hughes actually used it in his film Hell's Angels at the end of the film, where they crashed this Gotha bomber that was shot down. And that was Sikorsky's biplane that he built on Long Island. Now, from there, he started building float planes. And his friend Eddie Rickenbacker, he was very close friends with Charles Lindbergh, and he bought property in Connecticut near the water and started building very large float planes. And these float planes, with the help of Charles Lindbergh, became the first Pan Am Clippers. They opened the Caribbean routes. And so there's his second career in aviation, these very large seaplanes. And then, of course, his third career was helicopter design. And the company is still in Stratford, Connecticut. They still build, right now they're finishing up the Black Hawk design. They build the presidential helicopters, but the company still bears his name. So this gentleman was a super guy, a super aviator, designer. and he became a great American, of course. So I built this model to kind of honor him and to show people what he did in his early years in Russia. So and that's my reason for attempting this model. And really, I guess since I'm not an engineer, I'm very lucky that it came out looking like it did and flying like it did. I was very fortunate.
Well, it's a very interesting history, and I appreciate that you invited me to be part of it. And I definitely want to. We have a few pictures. So after the airplane was donated, we were given a wonderful tour, and I want to just showcase a few of those photos. The first one here, Sal was still finishing up putting the airplane together, and we were in a hangar. And right next to the hangar we were in was a smaller area that had a bunch of framed artwork from World War I aircraft. And this photo is one of the ones I took of the framed artwork that was, pictured on the side of World War I aircraft. And you can see there's one below it. I mean, there was just must have been at least a dozen of these in this room. And let's see what our next photo is. We'll talk about each one. This one. So we visited some of the things that they had as part of the collection, and they pulled out a few things for us to see as part of our tour. And this one really moved me because this was drawn by a POW, someone who was shot down during World War II and was a POW. And apparently through the Red Cross, they were given these booklets, like notebooks that they could write in or write letters or draw things or whatever they wanted to use it for. And this was that notebook from a POW during World War II who was a POW in Europe. And this was his artwork that he drew. And it was really moving. I mean, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about Sal, but I wanted to get a picture of it because I just thought it was very moving.
Well, in addition to that, remember we were shown a drawer full of pieces of soap that were carved by the Allied airmen, the prisoners of war, into things like a horse's head, figures. There was one that was a little truck made out of soap, carved out of soap by these Allied prisoners. That was pretty amazing.
All right, what are we going to talk about next? Let's see. The Swoos. So this is a B-17 that's currently under restoration at the Air Force Museum. And what do you know about that, Sal?
It's the oldest and the only, I think, B model B-17 in existence, and it had battle damage in the Philippines, and it was cobbled together with parts from another airplane, and that's why they named it the Swoos, because the name Swoos is half swan, half goose. And that's how they came up with the name. Now the pilot who flew this aircraft, flew it became a general staff aircraft, and he flew it all over the world for this general. And the pilot's name was, I believe, was Kurtz. Kurtz, yes. And in 1946, this pilot, after the war, had a daughter, one daughter, and he named the daughter Swoosy Kurtz. And if anybody knows, Swoosy Kurtz is an actress that plays in some sitcoms today, and she was named after this bomber.
Amazing history. All right, let's see what we have next. Oh, this is a very important uniform. I'll let you start, Sal. Go ahead.
Well, this uniform belonged to Billy Mitchell. This is his uniform, and Mitchell, he had quite a career himself, and after World War I, he really pushed for a bomber fleet, bomber aircraft, how important bombers were, and he pushed so hard that he was disgraced. He was disgraced early on in his career, but later on in his career, he was absolutely vindicated, and they named the twin-engine B-25 after him.
Yes, the B-25 Mitchell. He also was a very big proponent proponent of aircraft taking off from ships, as we know them as aircraft carriers. He was also a big proponent of that. What do we have next? I'll tell you the show. So this kind of ties in with the story. We talked about Lindbergh. So if you can't tell, that's Lindbergh's name inside a flying helmet with the date of 1922. So tell everyone about that moment for both of us, Sal.
Well, they gave us a behind the scenes tour of the facility. These are items that are not open to the general public. And this happened to be in one of their in their preservation department, along with a bunch of other items. But they took it off a head sculpt, and they gave us gloves before we entered this room. And that room, by the way, was temperature control and heat control and humidity control. And they took it off and they placed it in our hands. We all got to hold it, and they said, "This is Lindbergh's actual flying helmet." And then they opened the inside, and sure enough, Lindbergh. That's his handwriting. So we got to hold a piece of history, which is pretty cool.
And we actually have a picture of me holding it to give you an idea what it looks like. There it is. So, I mean, there's a lot of big names in aviation, and Lindbergh is, got to be up in the top few. And to actually, I don't know, I'll let you say what it meant to you, Sal, but I mean, just to actually be able to hold his flying helmet in my hand. I mean, it was just like, it's a memory, a special moment that I'll never forget. I mean, how did it feel for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but seeing Frank Luke's Medal of Honor
certificate.
Yeah, that was something else. They have so many artifacts that they don't have. They preserve them, but they're not on display. And we got a chance to see some of this, and that's really really special.
And something interesting for people watching to know is the room that we're in, that you see me in right there. That's also the room that Billy Mitchell's uniform was in. That room is kept at 55 degrees at all times. So when we went in there, it was noticeably colder, and then they had a readout of the temperature, and they keep it at 55 degrees. And then the helmets are kept inside another, almost looks like a refrigerator with glass doors. And in the storage that this helmet was in, Lindbergh's helmet, there was roughly 50 helmets in there that were all leather helmets. Some were obviously like from Germany and other countries. So this is the only one that we held and looked closely at, but I can only gather the importance and interest in the other helmets. There was also, you can kind of see it behind me, there's also spacesuits, early spacesuits for the space program, and it looked like something out of a Ray Harryhausen 50s sci-fi movie. These spacesuits. I mean, it really did.
Yes.
Yeah, the pressure suits. Yeah, and so we got to see that. So in this room, we had to, like Sal said, we had to have gloves on. And Sal mentioned the soap that was in this room. All the soap carvings were in this room.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. So here's a photo. There's Charles Lindbergh with Igor Sikorsky when he was designing his helicopter. They were very close friends. The Sikorsky family with Charles Lindbergh and Eddie Rickenbacker, and some other famous aviators of the day. They were all very close friends.
So, it was just a very special day. As Sal says, it went from being his model to an artifact. Anything at the Dayton Air Force Museum is an artifact. So he told me that when we had lunch that it went from being his model to an artifact. So I really appreciate you, Sal, inviting me to participate in this special day. And I want to just give you a minute to talk about what it meant to you.
Well, I have a love for aviation, and I have a love for aircraft that you don't normally see at many of our flying events. And I try to attend as many as I can the Academy of Model Aeronautics flying events, and I sometimes I feel I feel that I'm there to teach history. So I build some of these models that they're seldom seen, just so I can pass on a bit of history. And I was very happy with the outcome of the Sikorsky Ilya Muromets. And what I'm really happy about is while I can reach a few people at our events or at the Toledo show or at the AMA Expo or at the other museums I've been to with this aircraft, I now pass the baton to the National Museum of the United States Air Force, where thousands and thousands of people come through. So I passed the baton to them to show that the first 4-engine aircraft in the world were designed by Igor Sikorsky. That's their job now, and that makes me happy.
Well, and as I told you at lunch, it's a legacy, because it'll, the Air Force Museum will be around, I'm assuming, for basically forever, and that model will be there, as you said, to teach people and people to learn from. So
I'm just waiting to hear when and where they're going to display it. So as soon as I find something out, I'd like to take a trip back to see it again. And by the way, the Air Force Museum at Dayton is probably the largest aircraft museum in the world. They have over 1,100,000 square feet of aircraft, 338 full-size aircraft in that museum, all indoors. And they have examples like the B-36 Peacemaker, the Valkyrie, which is there's only one left. They built 2, there's 1 left. They have the presidential aircraft that you can go through. They have the B-17 bomber, Memphis Belle, very famous. They have the B-29 boxcar that unfortunately dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. They have every Air Force aircraft and some Axis aircraft to see in there, but 338 aircraft. It'll take you a while to see everything in that museum.
You mentioned the presidential aircraft. One of the aircraft they have in there, Air Force One, that was President Kennedy's aircraft. And, unfortunately, actually next week is the anniversary. November 22nd is the anniversary of, unfortunately, Kennedy's assassination. But they actually have the actual airplane that was used at the time that Kennedy was president, and that his body was on after his passing. You can go on it. You can literally walk on it and see it, along with a few other presidential aircraft.
Yeah, it's if you're interested in aircraft, it's a great place to visit. It's a must-do. It's a must-do visit, at least once in your life, and you have to spend a couple of days there. You just can't spend a day. There's so much to see. There really is. If I could find something here, I'm trying to find, and I had a photo somewhere, and again, you have to excuse me for being, but there was a picture I had somewhere of Igor Sikorsky, that jewel-encrusted gold watch that Tsar Nicholas gave him. That's the last Tsar of Russia. And his oldest son, of course, Sergei, has it now. But unfortunately, I don't have a photo of it. I thought I did, but I'll have to post it once I find it. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Well, I really appreciate, like I said, you inviting me. I appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about it. We got a comment. Great show, Jay. Enjoying every minute. Sal is a great model builder. So really, really enjoy having you on and talking about it. Yeah, it'll be exciting to go back and see it when it's on display.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up, I want to remind everyone the next show next month will be on December 15th. And also, if you're watching this either live or fairly close to live, I want to say Happy Thanksgiving. next week. It's hard to believe,
Yeah,
but Thanksgiving
everyone.
is here. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Sal, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you too for writing the column in Model Aviation and everything that you do to support the AMA and support the hobby.
Well, I'm certainly not a Pulitzer Prize winning author, but I am enthusiastic.
Well, Gary Fitch just said, congrats, Sal.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. He's a great guy, Gary Fitch.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll see everyone next month on December 15th. Again, have a great Thanksgiving, and thank you, Sal.
Take care now. Bye-bye.